My concern really is that the carer do as much and be as much as they can be in that experience, so that when they have to deal with the grief and the loss afterwards, they don't have any regrets, or they don't feel guilty, or they don't feel that somehow they didn't do the right thing. That they actually are able to kind of understand what they're going through while they're going through it, so that when they have the loss to face and to live with, they know that they did the best that they could. My job is really to stand by them and with the confidence that it will all go the way it is meant to go. My job as a support person isn't to force people to have discussions about matters they don't want to talk about. I do think if you're trying to support people who are going into this unknown area, it's without a map, it's really helpful if you've been in that unknown area yourself and have a map. And I think that's the big thing. I think I have a map because I've been there before in my own personal experience, so I can have empathy and compassion for someone else. We don't know what normal dying looks like because we don't see it. We don't see it on television, we don't see it in movies, we don't see it in our homes, we don't see it in hospitals. And so we don't know. We see people coming back from the edge of death on the medical programs that we watched. Hardly anybody ever dies, or if they do, it takes a moment, it's a moment. And you don't actually experience that 12 weeks or 6 months of what that's like. And so it's a big unknown. It's like a blackness. We just don't know how to deal with that ourselves. And yet dying is not a medical proposition for most people. It's not something that requires a lot of medical intervention. It just requires care and support and some knowledge of what might be coming up. I think what's the most important about carers and family and friends kind of acknowledging that their life is ebbing is that it helps prepare them for the loss. Whereas if you deny that your loved one is dying, or that's what's happening to you, and largely that's because of fear, it's because of anxiety, it's because we're in the unknown. We don't know in our culture what living right up to the end of life looks like, or what we might call dying looks like. What happens when the loss happens, the parting happens when someone dies, is that you're just thrown into another dimension almost. Whereas if you can prepare yourself as the one who's going to remain for that, then the loss, it's obviously incredibly painful and very difficult. But with the preparation of preparing yourself, the transition is a bit easier. I don't want anyone to think that because we can go through this lovely process and with support, that somehow or other it's going to take the pain away. It doesn't take the pain away. It's still very painful. But it does help, I think, people put it into some perspective. I think the value is that you don't have any regrets later about what you haven't said, and you aren't left with a feeling that you wished that you'd said something, that you wished that you'd shared with them the way that you felt about them, or that you'd shared some memories with them that you can't share with anyone else. Having those conversations, not just with the person who's dying, but in your family and friend group as well, it kind of creates a space where if you need support, or if you need help, or if you get confused, because you've already started having that conversation and people know what's happening, because often we pretend or we don't tell anyone what's really happening. If you've started already having those conversations, then people can reach out for help. Carers can reach out and and they can carry on having the conversation about other things that arise during the time that someone's dying or that they're caring for someone who's dying. If you never start the conversation, by the time you get to the last few weeks of someone's life, it's really hard to overcome that barrier of silence that's been created. So it's identifying the basic elements that it would be good to have in place. Finances are a big thing. Family support's another one. They might be happy to talk about their will or their financial circumstances. They might not. Practical support. Do people really understand what's going on with their loved one in terms of the disease that's their terminal disease or whatever their condition is? What do they understand about that? What do they already know about what's going on? What do they need to know? Do they need to know about the practical services that might be available? Do they need to have some understanding about how their home might be set up differently to make it easier to care? My job isn't to figure that out for them. My job is to help them figure that out. Help them highlight maybe some gaps or areas where they might need some more help. It's not to push them to have a conversation about dying. That just may not be suitable. Have they had a discussion with any medical practitioners? Do they know about what might be ahead? If they hadn't, really, my job would be to support them to have those conversations with the others around them. And then as time goes on, to really help them understand that there is a process of dying. There are some commonalities of experience that happen to everyone when they're caring for somebody who's dying. Every circumstance is different, but I think it's safe to say that when someone's in the last few weeks of their life, there will be some common things that will happen that are visible and that are understandable. So often what happens is people get very, very upset because someone doesn't want to eat anymore. But that's a common thing that happens to virtually everyone who's dying. Not everyone, but virtually everyone. And they stop drinking, and people get very upset because they think they're not caring because their loved one isn't eating and they can't get them to eat and they can't get them to drink anything. This is usually a sign that someone's in their last few days of life. And it's normal. I've heard many people talk about what a privilege it was. I think it's harder if you've had many years of caring. If you know you've got this much time, 3 or 4 months, or you've got 6 months, and you've got some support as a carer and a family, I think it can be a very enriching experience. It certainly was for me when I cared for this friend of mine, because I was a part of a team of 40 people that cared for her. So though I was the one that was actually with her when she died, because she was a single woman, and she had vast communities of people because she was just a lovely, connected person. Over 12 weeks, 40 of us took it in shifts to care for her. So most people did 1 shift a week, and it was a lovely experience for all of us and for her as well. That's rare. The notion that if you are in a connected kind of community of whatever kind, if you call on those connections and enable those people to be involved in the caring, as you, the primary carer, it relieves you. It gives you some respite, some time to really be a wife or a mother or a daughter instead of a carer. And it also enables those connections and those friends and family to also share the experience and share the intimacy. It's an incredibly intimate thing to be with someone when they die, and in the weeks and months before they die. And that can be very enriching. It's by no means the norm. I think especially if a caring situation goes on for some months or years, and death is the culmination of many years of caring, quite intensively for some people, there is a lot of resentment built up, because the reality is that for many people, that's not they didn't want to be a carer when they grew up. Most people don't put that down at high school when they say, what do you want to do when you grow up? You don't do an HSC in caring for most of us. For some people it is. It's them the way they are naturally. They would give anything to care for their loved one in that time. But for a lot of people, it isn't their choice. It comes upon them. And yes, some of the feelings that one has, well, I would call them the shadow. They would call it the shadowy side. They're the gray feelings. They're the feelings of resentment or of anger or of frustration or of being overwhelmed. I think we shouldn't deny that because that's a part of the experience too. It's not all sweetness and light at the end, even if you... And the other thing to remember is that people come into these circumstances and experiences with relationships that may have been built up over years with resentments and angers and frustrations. So not all marriages are happy. Not all parent and child relationships are happy. Not everyone had a great childhood with their siblings or with their parents. So all of that gets rolled into this experience. There's nothing you can do to fix that. You just have to accept that and give people the space to be the way they really are. And they may not like it. They might not like caring for their loved one. They might not be a loved one. It might just be an obligation. So we have to accept that as well. Caring for another person is really, it's hard work. And though you might be doing it with great love, it's never ending. You know, it goes 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if that goes on for months and sometimes years, you do just begin to feel like that's your job. It's a job. And maintaining your kind of relationship, whatever that might be, it's hard to do that because you're not sharing. You're not able to share your job with your partner because it's a caring job for them. I suppose with parents caring for children, you're kind of used to that because that's been your role. But if your children are adults, then that's not your role anymore. And you know, you're supposed to be two adults kind of sharing on an equal basis. So, you know, I think that gets very difficult. And as a child caring for a parent, again, that's kind of the reverse of how we expect things are supposed to be. I think it's important to preserve, if you can, within all that caring, complication and drudgery, the kernel of what you mean to each other, rather than just seeing each other as one person's the job that needs to be done and the other person is the person who does the job. I think trying to find a place where you can just be with each other is really important, and it's hard to do when you've got this never-ending series of tasks and jobs that you have to do. And which is why getting support and help in, whether it's professional or it's voluntary or it's other family and friends, is really important.